you're going to learn the ethical implications of growing. And I always talk about how you're amazing and you're going to grow. Your community is going to love you. So even if you're like, I just want to be a little standalone solo practice, well, too bad. You're going to have people knocking on your door because we need you. So are there ethical implications of growth? Well, yes. And I wouldn't have done this if there weren't, right? So there are lots of things that I've already covered. So, for example, Google reviews, client testimonials, that's always a thing when you're trying to grow, right? Because everybody says, well, you've got to have testimonials, just like a restaurant. You have to have reviews, you have to have all of those things. Well, I covered that in Texas Counselors Creating Badass Businesses podcast episode 73. And Step It Uppers, you have it as a training, or you will as soon as I add it. Also, I talked about self-audits and proper onboarding. This is a requirement for HIPAA and House Bill 300. Well, this is covered in episode 70 of Texas Counselors Creating Badass Businesses, and lucky Step It Uppers, you also get this as a training. I talk about burnout, right? Because that's an implication of growing, whether you're growing too fast or a lot of times I hear people have had an agency job and they just kind of think that's how things are supposed to work. You're supposed to have 50 clients a week and just go until you drop. And private practice is so much different because you have so much control over your schedule, how much you charge. So I talk about that in episode 61. So those are the things I'm not going to be covering in this training because you either have it if you're a Step It Upper, or if you're listening on the podcast, you can access it that way. Today, I'm going to focus on what our guest expert, blogger, social media influencer, Jenny Melrose, covered in her webinar on Thursday. Now, I'm not going to give it all away because I want you to watch the training, and that's actually a CE. So it's a CE when you attend live, and Step It Uppers, you get the CE when you watch asynchronously, which just means you watch it later, right? So I'm not going to give it all away, but there were some key elements that I wanted to pull out and just kind of compact into a little mini training for you today. And of course, I will answer your questions. So one of the things we talked about in that webinar was the use of ChatGPT to create content. So those of you who aren't familiar with ChatGPT and you're Googling that right now, you're going to find that this is artificial intelligence, AI, that can basically save your bacon when it comes down to having writer's block. And you're like, I don't know what to do. Or you've listened to all of our advice and you're going to create that very first freebie for your particular client population. And you're like, okay, I'm going to create a checklist, things you must do as you're waking up your kiddo and getting them ready for school when they have ADHD. Here are the 5 things you need to do. Well, ChatGPT can totally help you out with that. As you're growing and you're not having the time to kind of craft all these things on your own, or I know a lot of practice owners who are growing, and I'm going to give you 2 examples. So you might have a practice owner who's growing and they're like, I'm going to have my supervisees or the people that I hire do all that content work. Or maybe you are the one who is going to be in charge of the content, but you're growing and growing and growing and you just don't know which direction to go. And you're just like, I have to, it's like feeding the beast, right? You have to create content. So ethically, what can happen or what may be happening is scope of practice issues. So imagine, if you will, if you're a supervisor and you are looking at your supervisee's website copy because they own their own private practice, which of course everybody knows you can do in Texas. You can have your own private practice. Well, you look at that website copy, and remember, copy is just another word for content. And you notice, they seem to be writing about like helping people with eating disorders. And they're level 1, and I don't recall them having any special training in eating disorders. So you broach the conversation and you say, hey, I noticed you're writing this really informative article and using ChatGPT, and it's great and all, but you don't do this specialty. This is not within the scope of practice we've discussed or I've evaluated you for, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, well, it ranks. So when I go to Google, this topic ranks super high. And I know that if I can put this article out there, it's going to boost my website on the Google machine. So, hey, brilliant, right, supervisor? No, not brilliant, because that is informational, sure, and information's always a good thing if it's accurate. But if your supervisee's call to action at the end of that blog or that content or on that website page that has that AI generated copy is, here, click here to book a session with me. Well, that's like the old maybe bait and switch back in the day, right? Like, I'm going to the car dealership because you're offering a deal on Chevys, and when I get there, all you sell are Hyundais. I don't have a problem with either car, just an example, right? So when you're a supervisor and you're thinking about, okay, there's no rule that says my supervisee can't do this. Well, that's why we're calling it an ethical implication. If your supervisee is putting out information with a call to action that leads to an appointment, and that information doesn't reflect their current scope of practice, right? Maybe it's aspirational, like someday they would like to work with eating disorders and get trained. That's on you, supervisor, because it's clinical and it does fall under marketing, right? In the LPC and LMFT codes in Texas, you must only represent yourself for the skills you actually have, right? You can't misrepresent yourself in that way. So ChatGPT is a lifesaver when it comes to creating content that you already specialize in. And I know our supervisees don't have specialties, right? They want to, and they're getting there. And maybe you too, right? Like, you've been in an agency forever and you're like, I really would like to get into working with folks with chronic pain. Yes, get trained in that someday. But if you ask ChatGPT to create content so you can grow, remember that's the title of this training, the ethical implications of growth, and you're growing for the sake of growing, and you're like, oh, we'll find out we're not a good fit at our first session. That's not ethical. You just wasted that person's time. So that's also what I wrote down in my notes: rank without regard, right? This idea that it's going to boost me in the rankings, but I really don't care who clicks. I just want to be number one, and I want Google to see that my content is good and it boosts me, right? That's really ranking, desire to rank without regard for being a mismatch for your clients. Again, not really against a rule in the LPC LMFT code, especially if you're just giving information, right? You're not saying this is what I do, but you're offering information with a call to action that some, person out there who's suffering is now going to think, oh gosh, well, they have the content, they're giving me an opportunity to make an appointment. They have to have the expertise, right? So that's where it falls under that umbrella of ethics. So the ethics of growth when it comes to creating content to boost your website. Another ethical issue I want to talk about is actually something I hear my colleagues talk about a lot, and it's the ethics of the waiting list or the wait list, right? You'll hear, or I hear people say all the time, oh, I don't keep a wait list. I think that's unethical to have people on a wait list. Well, first and foremost, there's no rule in the LPC or LMFT codes that say you cannot have a wait list. So we're talking about it in terms of ethics, not rules. And so when you're growing, because you're amazing, people will love you. And especially if you are in an underserved area, right? Bless you if you are serving folks in underserved rural or frontier Texas, and you have this waiting list, because there's only one you, and you have so many hours in the day, and you don't want to burn out. Well, that's growth, everybody. That's what that is. So one of the things, and I'm going to be talking about this more in the upcoming months, is creating an online course, creating a freebie resource, something. My friend Cindy Doyle and I kind of coined this term, pieces of you, something that the client can take away while they're on your website. And we talked about this in the webinar last week with Jenny Melrose. This can be your call to action, right? You've read the blog, and now here's something you can do today. So I think my example in the training was, if you're a play therapist and you have a wait list, you could create some kind of a short YouTube video that says, here are 5 things you could do before your first play therapy appointment. Or if you don't like videos and recording yourself, do a checklist. Here are a list of 5 things you can remember while you're playing with your child before your first therapy appointment. So in that sense, you're filling a need, you're giving that person on your wait list something to do that feels effective, right? It feels like you're actually doing something. You're not just giving them fluff while they're maybe going to get an appointment with you. Because let's be real, if you're awesome and you're amazing and you're in an underserved area, that person may never get that first appointment, or it may be too late, right? Something has already happened and they've had to go another route. So they want you, they want what you have to offer. What's wrong with giving it to them, right? If you're a Step It Upper, there are trainings right now, I think. I may have to edit this out. I think there are trainings right now. If there aren't, I know we're going to open the archive and bring some trainings back. And that would definitely be one of those, creating an online course. But it doesn't even have to be that ambitious. If you're in Texas Counselors Creating Badass Businesses Facebook page, you know that every Wednesday I put out a call for all the badassery. I want everybody to post if they sell something, if they give something away, if they've written a book. Well, one of the things that maybe made you kind of go, what is that? Is a downloadable, right? That's just something that you've turned into a PDF and you're able to put it on your website so that folks can download it and have it in their hands, hit print, and have access to it immediately. So this is one that came up at the TASES conference. So supervisors, you and me for just a second, right? And I know you're trying to do good work. Actually, this came up in the Texas Supervisor Coalition monthly consultation group. If you're in a small town or even a big town and you're like part of the solution, right? So you're going to have a ton of supervisees. I hate to break it to you. Well, no, I don't hate to break it to you. I want to break it to you. You must meet with them. All right. I don't want you to be under any delusions at all. You must meet with your supervisees. So if you have done so well in the therapy room that now you're growing outside of the therapy room, you took the 40-hour training, you became a supervisor, you're growing these these counselors, beginner counselors into your colleagues, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm the only one around. I'm growing. Remember, LPC doesn't limit you, and I don't believe LMFT limits you either on the total number of associates you can have. But we're hearing about people cutting corners, that they are not meeting with their supervisees. And you notice I'm not qualifying that with on a regular basis. Like I'm literally saying here into the camera, they are not meeting with supervisees. And this is how they're cutting corners, and or they're doing 100% group, right? Because if you have 30 supervisees, I mean, that's 30 hours a week you'd have to do individual supervision, or triadic would be 15. I'd have to do the math on that. So yeah, of course you can do group with LPC and LMFT, right? At least half of the time, but half of what? Like you plan on doing group for a year and then trying to make up the difference for the next 18 months? I'm sorry, 6 months, if their direct hour accrual time is 18 months. So you see, it becomes an issue, not just an ethical issue. This is a rule issue. This is direct liability. This can jeopardize your license. So growing is wonderful. Filling a need in your community is wonderful. Growing these counselors into your colleagues is wonderful. The ethical implication is it can be overwhelming. You run out of time. You start doing things, cutting corners. These are, things you think you need to do in order to stay ahead. Reach out, ask for consultation, ask questions, listen to stuff like this. Go to conferences like the TASES Midwinter Conference, attend Texas Supervisor Consultation Group, do whatever you got to do, but just know the ethics behind growing when you're a supervisor. Last but not least, I'm going to show off a little thing I did. My clinical practice, achievebalance.org. I started that. Actually, it started off as all about the family in 2004. And in 2007, I did a DBA and an S Corp, anyway, an LLC. And so since 2007, I have been achievebalance.org. Well, gosh, it took about 6 months, but about 2 months ago, I finally got the trademark and it's hanging up behind me. So right here, when you see that, that's my official trademark. And I was so proud of that. And I have that because when you grow, you're going to have people who copy you. Now, I'm going to take my glasses off. I want you to see this with a smile. This is kind of a compliment, right? When people copy you and they're getting ideas from you and even ideas for website copy and things like that, right? That's a wonderful thing that they're getting ideas to grow and they're getting ideas to grow their own practice in their own little towns. But you've worked hard on this. You have grown enough so that other people notice your good work and the work that you're doing on the website. Now, in this group and any group that I'm a part of, I don't foster competitiveness, right? I think there's enough business to go around. But your work is your work. So the ethics of growing, number one, is, don't copy stuff that doesn't belong to you, either one, without permission, or two, offering proper credit, or both, right? Let the other person know, hey, I love how you're advertising working with clients with eating disorders. I wonder if I could pick your brain a little bit, or if there's a way that I could offer a similar resource, right? Sometimes communication is all it takes, right? So that's one. Don't take other people's stuff without permission. But on the other side, if you're amazing, go through the process of getting trademarked. There are lots of ways to do it. I'm not going to do a webinar on that because I don't even really remember all the steps I went through. I did it on my own, but I know I had to go back and forth a few times. You have to prove how many years you've been in business. You have to show them PDFs, screenshots of marketing, because, gosh, I want to say back in 2007, we had the internet. Obviously, but I think I had to even show them PDFs of kind of paper cards and brochures that I had used in the past. So long and short, if I find people out there using achievebalance.org, you know me, I'm not putting anybody out of business because we need you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I notice that you have my clinic's name. And so would you just let people know if they're looking for me, how to contact me? Like, I don't want to put you out of business. I don't want you to have to spend thousands of dollars defending yourself while we go into some weird legal battle over a name. I just need you to be sure that if a client's looking for me, you send them my way. Here's my contact information, right? That way we're all staying collegial. We're fostering collaboration. We're all on the same page. We're trying to help people. But at the same time, if you steal stuff that doesn't belong to you, there will be consequences. So if you're feeling wrapped up and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything to write, I need to produce website copy, don't cut corners, right? Reach out, Ask for help. That's what this group is all about. That's what Texas Counselors Creating Badass Businesses is all about. Ask for help, right? You can tag me on Facebook and say, can you do a webinar on how to create great website copy? Yes, absolutely. But you got to let me know. So ethical implications of growth, just to wrap up, I gave you the episodes and of some trainings that I've done previously. I've talked about website copy, not only for you practitioner, but also for supervisors. I talked about rank without regard and the ethics of the waiting list, how to give people pieces of you, especially in rural and underserved areas. I talked about supervisors. You gotta meet with every one of your supervisees, no matter what. And I didn't tell you how to trademark, but I told you maybe dangled a carrot if that's something you want to do someday.